Hey everyone, welcome to episode 88 of the Ceres podcast. I'm your host Elias, and I'm also the founder and director of the World of Ceres. In this episode, I talked to Jimmy Buchan, one of the most knowledgeable people I've met with anything to do with seafood and fish, really, especially to date. Jimmy is the managing director of Amity Fish Company. Having lived in Peterhead all his life, Jimmy knows a thing or two about fish. He's got over 40 years of fishing experience and 30 years experience as a skipper. He left school in 1976 to pursue a career as a fisherman, and in 1986 Jimmy bought his first trawler, named Amity, which means friendship. Since then, he's learned to adapt and change to meet the challenges and opportunities of the industry. In 2006, Jimmy and his crew starred in the BAFTA award-winning BBC TV documentary Trawlermen, which showcased the challenges experienced within the Scottish fishing industry to the world. After 3 decades in the wheelhouse, Jimmy came onshore and set up his own seafood supply company and continues to manage the business, which also supplies B2B and B2C, which is quite a big deal in my view. And if you really want to sort of like jump onto his website and buy some of his stock for your restaurant, fish and chip shop, or whatever it may be, go ahead. But if you don't want it for that, just order some for home because it's pretty great looking stuff. In addition to running Amity Fish Company, Jimmy is the CEO of Scottish Seafood Association and is a hard-working ambassador for the sector, continuing to promote the seafood industry locally and abroad. It was great to have Jimmy on the Ceres podcast. It's probably our first guest with such a hands-on, deep knowledge of the Scottish fishing industry, but we think this will be the first of many, and hopefully we can not only delve deeper with others, but also get Jimmy back on in the future. On to a few Ceres updates. We caught up with Michael Pilley. Michael has been involved with the fish and chip industry for over 60 years and he hasn't even retired yet. We wanted to chat to him and pick out some of those great stories that I've heard many times before. All being well, after this lockdown, we'll get Michael onto the Ceres podcast too. We've also written a great little article on the 7 enemies of frying oil. Many don't realise all the factors that can affect your frying oil, so we chose the 7 most important factors. Have a read, let us know what your feedback is because we'd love to know what you think. Also, in this month's email, you will find a discount code for 20% off Ceres potato preparation, so you may as well get online and bag yourself a bargain. Anyway, enough from me. I hope you enjoy episode 88 with Jimmy Buchan. Jimmy Buchan, welcome to the Ceres podcast.
Yeah, thank you. It's just something different for me to do, and I look forward to chatting with you and discussing lots of all things fish.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Fish and seafood and Scotland.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've had some technical issues today, our second day, but we've managed to get it sorted and we're good to go now, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the age that we are currently in where technicalities can hang us up, but we were never ones to give up. So here we are. We're ready to go now.
So, Jimmy, for those that don't know you, give us a little introduction about yourself and what it is that you do.
Well, I've been a fisherman for most of my life. I left school at the age of tender age of 16, went straight to the fishing, and had a great career thereafter, which lasted over 40 years. I think 43 years to be precise. I'm now in the autumn of my career, you might say. I'm now shore based. I have got 2 roles in my life now. One is that I'm a chief executive of the Scottish Seafood Association, which is the representative body of the processing sector. And of course, my other operation, my other part of my life is that I am the MD of Amity Fish Company, which is a seafood supply company. I'm not a processor, but we source and supply seafood across the UK through e-commerce. And also we supply local fish and chip shops, and we courier fish, seafood to various restaurants and fish and chip shops again across the UK. So, kind of using my background and my knowledge of fishing and the passion that I have for the industry, I am hopefully now being able to take the quayside to the discerning customer.
Yeah. Well, I've heard many great things about your product, and I don't think I've tried it yet because I don't think I've been in the right place at the right time. But I have heard many great things about it.
Well, that's good to hear. So, well, you're still missing out on
Definitely.
one of life's great moments of the day, and that is eating, which we all do daily, and that's why I'm such a passionate guy about seafood, the benefits of seafood, because it is a great protein and it's a very healthy protein, and of course in the UK we're surrounded by the richest fishing grounds in the world. I would go as far as to say, and therefore we are geographically well placed to feed many nations.
Many would disagree with you, though. I do lots of eating. I just need to do more seafood eating.
Well, there's a first time for everything, still is.
I love all seafood. I love all of it. And I guess my heritage is Cypriot, so again, seafood is a real big thing there. And then obviously, so you've got the seafood aspect of being Cypriot, and then you've got the fact that I was brought up in fish and chip shops all my life, so an abundance of seafood all my life, really. And I don't think I can ever get away from it. And I think one of the sad things is that, and we'll touch on it no doubt shortly, is that we live in the UK with hundreds of species in our waters, and yet most people just eat 5. And it does sort of make you wonder, like, where, has that, actually, if we just get into it right away, we can still talk about other things, but in your mind, has that got worse over the years? Did people eat more seafood when you were younger, let's say, or has it always been the big 5 as far as you can remember?
I think possibly it was always the big 5 because we weren't very extravagant with our palate. I think we were if I look back in my childhood, I mean, we were basic, hard-working people. We didn't have the lifestyle that we've got now. My mother had. I was one of 4 boys plus my father, so there's 6 of us in the house. And then they lived on a frugal wage, and therefore basic seafood was in abundance because there's a lot of it being landed. We weren't very exploring with the other things in life. So herring would have been one. Herring, and then I could have been kippers. Certainly haddock would have been another. Cod possibly may have been another. So I'm only at 3, and I can't think much more. If we look at squid, we look at langoustine, these scallops, none of these would have even been in our radar, never mind in our palate.
Wow. It's amazing, isn't it, really?
It is quite amazing when you think of it. And yet, one of the stories I always tell people, because I got known latterly through my career of being a langoustine or a prawn fisherman. We call them prawns, but to use the better name would be langoustine or even more specific Scottish langoustine. But I always say to people, when my grandfather, who was a skipper, was bouncing me on his knee as a 1-year-old, I'll bet he never ever thought that his grandson would be a guy that would be going out to catch posh prawns, langoustine, and sending them across the world into Greater Europe and across the world, because they were primarily herring fishermen. And prior to that, they had been whalers. So the range of species they had, they were basic survivors. But as the world has evolved, and it has shrunk through container ships and through being able to fly stuff, a shrinking world that way, then we were able to reach a bigger marketplace that was looking for more species, and hence I suppose that's why our fisheries have become so important to feeding many different nations across the world.
Yeah. Do you think When do you think the transition? When do you think the transition happened, where fishermen went from mostly just fishing whatever they could get domestically, and then selling it domestically, to then being very specific about what they catch, and then selling it across the globe? Was that in your time? Was it your dad's time? Was it a crossover?
I think probably primarily it would have been in my time, probably even in the last 40 years. And one of the good things that came out of the UK entering the common market, and you watch the specific words I've used here, the common market, which was a place to trade freely with each other, because latterly we became part of a political union, and that's, I don't want to go there. That's a whole different ball game. But this was a common market where we had seafood in abundance, but we had a huge nation on our doorstep, which was France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and that was the trading place, and that was where I think in my time, in the 70s and the 80s, we were able to grow the marketplace. And as I said, through better routes to market, we were able to get that product, improving its quality. Kind of innovation has played a huge part in this. Better quality seafoods, better process, speed to market, and of course the marketing of the product itself. So we were able to open up this natural market that had an insatiable appetite for seafood.
Yeah, no, massively. And I think how do you ever foresee consumers being interested in more than the big five? Do you see that as ever being possible, or does it mean, that a lot of money has to be thrown behind certain fish species?
Well, I wonder if there is a demographic to this, as in different cultures eat different seafood. I mean, your background is a separate. So, what were the things that you were brought up with? What were the things I were brought up with? And I think if you go to different areas, even across the United Kingdom, you will find different groups of people, different cities, specifically eat different. But I think through good media would be one way. I think schools program is definitely another, because I think one of the things I am very passionate about, we must invest in youth. Youth is tomorrow's moms and dads, and I think if you can educate them now and learn them how to see the values in seafood, because it's good for your health. It is readily available, but the marketing of it, because the people are not demanding it. So if it's not in demand, then if it's not selling, then the seller will find another market, and that's how I think the European market developed. But whilst that developed, would you believe that we became huge importers of seafood?
Oh, really?
So we didn't really want the fish we catch, but we're still good seafood eaters. We import a lot of tuna, we import a lot of shrimp and prawns from other parts of the world. We also import from Norway and Iceland and Faroes. So we're a huge importer of seafood. But we're also a huge exporter of seafood. And one of the stats that I do know is that 80% of the seafood we catch in the United Kingdom we export. And 80% of the seafood we eat in the United Kingdom we import. And that sounds very, very, very strange for an island nation that is surrounded with some of the greatest fishing grounds in the world.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing how that sort of almost equal transfer is almost like, and to be fair, it feels like it almost feels like we're exporting the good stuff, and we're importing sort of, again, frozen at sea, cod and haddock, like you say, cold water prawns, tuna that comes in a tin. I guess most salmon is what's most salmon? Scottish, farm Scottish, Norwegian a bit, maybe.
Scottish salmon is a huge brand globally, yeah. But again, you may find when you go to food service that although it's maybe salmon you're eating, it may not be entirely Scottish. It could be Norwegian, because again they are great at aquaculture. So,
Yeah.
but it's been driven by the consumer, and the consumer. Again, another stat that I'm led to believe from years ago, that we would have spent 30% of our income, our weekly income, on food. I'm now led to believe that is reduced down to 12%. So we still want to eat food, but we're not maybe prepared to pay a premium for that food. And again, wild-caught seafood is expensive to go and catch, process, and market, as opposed to chicken that can be reared in huge chicken sheds. So that type of competition that we've got as a protein is much harder to compete in the market when you've got wild-caught quality seafood at a price point that it could be in some cases 4 times the price of chicken fillets that you maybe do not have any provenance on.
Well, it's interesting because I was chatting to a friend of mine who owns quite a few McDonald's stores, and they have their chicken prices hedged for the next 5 years. And you just couldn't do that with fish. You couldn't say that for 5 years. Well, I don't think you could do it with many proteins, but to say 5 years, we know exactly what the price is. And I was reading, and I read up on it after she told me that. And it was just by chance that I was reading a book by a hedge fund manager, and he was actually responsible for doing it. So it was just by chance. And he was responsible for striking the deal because he went to Tyson Foods, which is the huge American chicken conglomerate, and basically said, look, if you fix all your oil prices, you fix all your soya prices, you fix all your labor costs, you can, if you guarantee a certain output, you can do this deal with McDonald's. And they did. And it just makes you wonder that you can't really do that with anything else. Even with farmed seafood, you can't probably do that, can you?
I think probably not. I don't think that far ahead, because I think costs are a huge factor in this. But I think what we've also got to never forget is, in the United Kingdom, we do have legislation that makes the production of anything very expensive, and that is employment costs. There are laws in the country now that we must provide pension costs, we must provide minimum labour costs. Bigger businesses have got to deal with business rates. So there are so many, and energy costs are very expensive in the UK as well. So it's very hard for us to compete with other global markets.
Yeah.
But on wild caught, we do not know what the quota will be for this year. This is in March. Far less what the quota will be in 5 years' time. But when you are able to breed animals, livestock, or poultry to a market that you know the demand will be there year on year, then it is much easier for you to kind of forecast ahead what that cost will be. On wild caught, because of the supply and demand, if the quota goes up, usually there's oversupply and the demand can come down. And likewise the other way, if there's a cut in the quota, then the price goes shooting up because it's not so abundant. But I mean, the one thing that I do see is that the global population is growing year on year. And therefore, I do think that what we've got to have in fisheries is sustainable fisheries that is going to yield a future and a food protein for this growing market that is, as I say, that is the world population keeps on growing, and I do see that the need that the demand will come for sustainable fisheries, and I think that's what I see has happened dramatically, changed from. If I think back to 1976 when I left the school, we had this attitude of pile them high and sell them cheap. Fish was in abundance. It was a great industry to be in, and it was just as much as you could harvest. There was no control. Again, 40 years later, we found that we did overfish the seas, and that was through to innovation, through to to what we call technical creep. It's just things getting better and faster doing what it is by machinery, by electronics. And therefore, we could not keep catching more and expect the seas to produce product for us in the future. So certainly the one thing that I've seen changing is our understanding about what we need to do to protect the seas and what methods we need to put in place. Now, as fishermen, we resisted them at times, but hindsight has always showed that it was actually protecting your own future. You just couldn't see it at the time. I'm kind of proud to say now that are we perfect? Possibly not, but have we moved significantly in improving fisheries and how we manage stocks? I would say absolutely, and it's something that I'm glad to see that on the back end of my career, we certainly have embraced, and I would go as far as to say that we're on a trajectory that can possibly is sustainable.
Yeah. Do you think the quotas are just right, or do you think that we're overcautious? When they set the quotas, is it often that you sort of think, yeah, they've hit the nail on the head, or actually, no, they're way off here?
I would have said latterly when I was fishing, and this is going back maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, that there always seemed to be like a lag in the system. The science was always right, but it never ever seemed to tie up with the year we fished, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But looking at it, I have to say yes, because sometimes you thought, how can there be no cod or at least they're saying there was no cod. There was never a stage where there was no cod, but we did see that the cod stock was not what it was. And the other thing that I've seen is the fish moving further north into deeper water. So when in my time we would caught a lot of fish in the middle of the North Sea, mid North Sea, that has kind of changed significantly. Another change that I saw in my career was that we primarily caught cod, haddock, plaice, whiting, coley. These would have been the kind of 5 main species, and yet in the turn of the century or the late 1990s, the haddock stock was under severe pressure. There was decommissioning of vessels. And I had to make a career change. And that career change was I changed from being a whitefish catcher to a shellfish catcher because there was an abundance and a growing stock of what we could see as Scottish langoustines. So the seas itself was changing. Environmental change was happening and it was producing different species. And I think that's the one thing that I always kind of say to people, I'm confident that there will be a future. There will be fishing. What I'm not confident is what particular species we may be fishing. Because if I even just look back the last 100 or so years, we were herring fishermen. Then we became great whitefish fishermen. And then there was a culture that we went full scale into shellfish catching. And now we've kind of got a hybrid of all of the above. So have we got the balance right? Is the environment continuing to change? Hake is another one. We never saw any hake in the North Sea, yet hake is in abundance in the North Sea now. So what has happened to allow these different species to start growing and appearing in our fisheries?
So many would say that it's probably a sort of cause of global warming. If the seas are getting a bit warmer, then the fish around the seas or around the coast, shall I say, are going to change and diversify. And I'm not a scientist. I'm just trying to think on the spot here. But if the haddock haddock and the cods are going further north, and hake's coming in, and I read somewhere that apparently red mullet. Actually, you can find red mullet now on South Coast, which is a very Mediterranean fish. And it just sort of makes you wonder, like, I can't ever envisage people in my industry, fish and chips, battering red mullet. But it does make you think, like, could we be seeing different varieties into the restaurant plate, into the kitchen,
Absolutely. And I think that is where we as consumers need to be a bit more adventurous hospitality maybe need to just take some of the famous five, as you call it, off the menu. Not all of them, but some of them, and try and. I remember doing a charity event in Aberdeen, and I was asked to supply the seafood. So I decided that night it was going to be smoked hake, right? There was no choice. You turned up at the event, you paid your money. We were raising money for the Fisherman's Mission. But I said, right, tonight it is going to be smoked hake. There was about 30 or 40 people there. Many of them said that they'd never tasted such a nice piece of fish. And they said, had they seen it on the menu and there had been something else to choose, they would not have chosen it.
Yeah.
Yet they enjoyed it. So sometimes you've got to force people in to experiment with their own palate. And then at that point, they begin to realize that there are other species out there which are worthy of trying and can be very, very enjoyable at a cheaper price point.
Yeah, it's always back in the day when I used to fry in my dad's fish and chip shops. We used to do coley, which is save, and it was like, I don't know, for argument's sake, it was a third of the price of cod, and we used to obviously, we used to pass that on, and even then, like, so trying to get customers to really like consider it, it was hard because they'd never heard of coley, or the older ones did, and actually, in fairness, in one of the shops, which has a heavy Scottish immigrants, essentially, because they are, they did appreciate it. But even so, like, most other people were just like, nah, it's all right, thanks, I'll stick to cod. And you try to show them, actually, it is just like cod. And actually, when it's cooked, I'd be surprised if anybody can tell the difference. But in a raw state, obviously, it's a bit grey. So... Yeah. But it was just so hard trying to get people to sort of, look at different species. And I often wondered if supermarkets took the lead, I wonder if that would have helped. But again, I suppose they just want to sell what people want to buy, don't they?
Absolutely. And if something doesn't return money from the shelf, then they're inclined to discount it or just delist it because they don't see any value in carrying it. So it is consumer driven, but consumer can be driven by good marketing. So I think there's a combination of much more we can do and just try and educate people about the different species that's there, what is swimming around in our coastlines. And I think, I'll tell you what I do think. I think the meat industry are very good at advertising and promoting their wares. I don't think we're so good at it in the seafood market, but it's just such a difficult market to get into because, as I say, we are competing against products that are farmed or aquacultured in other parts of the world that are very competitive in price and can sometimes push us off the market shelf.
Yeah, and especially if, let's say, if it's coming from, let's say, beef from Brazil or Argentina. Well, if they've got subsidies to sell it abroad, then that again makes the disparity even bigger, doesn't it? One of the things that really frustrates me about supermarkets is that they do actually try to sell different species, but they're very selective with it. So, for example, they do like a fish pie mix, and it's basically salmon, something smoked, like smoked haddock, or they now swap it out for smoked panga or white panga, which is obviously catfish. And you think to yourself, well, if you can put catfish in there, why couldn't you make it coley? Why couldn't you make it, something that's, grown in the UK or wildly caught in the UK? And it always makes me wonder, why did you have to go to Vietnam for that fish when you could have got something perfectly good from the UK?
No, absolutely. And that's one of my pet hates, is that I think supermarkets could do much more to support the local seafood communities of the United Kingdom. I mean, you go to Cornwall, you've got fantastic sardines. You come to the East Coast, you've got Cromer crab, and again, you come up to Scotland, we've got all the white fish from the deep sea and the West Coast, and again, wherever you go, we all have great seafood, and it always frustrates me when it's it's highlighted as line caught from Iceland, or these are great things. They're great selling points, but the Great British public need to realise that if they're buying UK caught and landed seafood, they are supporting fishermen, they're supporting communities, and they're helping us to remain kind of less dependent on other faraway markets, reducing road miles. So as I say, it's one of the things that I would like to see is the supermarkets coming out and understanding a bit more about the seafood, rather than trying to tick all these boxes to keep, dare I say, people who have got maybe greener credentials at bay, because that is one of the things that the industry is continually fighting, is against these big charitable organisations who, if they had their way, would have fishermen shut down and off the seas. But when we've got to realise that we are commercial fishermen. We do live in small communities, and we do depend on the sea to earn our living. So what we've got to do is be able to prove that we are fishing the sea sustainable, and that can be through many different methods. Get through quotas, through technical measures on nets, fishing areas, closing spawning areas. There's so much things fishermen are doing now to protect the seas, and I just wish people would understand that a wee bit more. That can you buy something that's local, then you're supporting communities and generations of culture and can lifeblood from going, and it'll go into the next lot of generations.
Yeah.
What we need is investment in young people, but knowing full well that we've got to understand the science, and we've got to do it ethically in a sustainable manner. And I'm sure we can do it, but it just needs a wee bit of TLC.
I think one thing that I'm so impressed of from a retail point of view, and we'll get onto wholesale in a minute, but from a retail point of view, I live in the town where Aldi supermarket head office is, and that's our main supermarket. So we've got Aldi and we've got a Co-op food. The Co-op food, for the most part, they do sort of try promote British, but for the most part, it's fish from abroad, or it's meat from abroad, where you see it. Whereas Aldi supermarket, it's Scottish salmon, it's British fish, it's British meat, and it is impressive that they've gone all the way down that line. Welsh lamb, British lamb, and they really do promote, you see Scottish mussels with a big Scottish flag on the packet. And I think they do really promote British. But then from a wholesale point of view, obviously, you'd be aware, obviously, you sort of, your industry skirts our industry a little bit, and you'd be fully aware that there's been this lifelong debate over frozen at sea fish, which mostly comes from, I don't know, the Faroe Islands, Iceland, Russia, Norway, and I've probably forgotten someone, and the Barents Sea and so on. And then you've also got the sort of wet fish, fresh fish, which is the North Sea, Scottish waters, and so on. It's always been whittled down to fresh versus frozen. And I think the debate's bigger than that. I've always thought that. And I actually think that I've always said that, I manufacture batters, and I tell people to use batter slightly differently for fresh fish than I do for frozen at sea fish, because the flesh is different. For the most part, over the years, most people that I've met have moved on to frozen at sea, because they would say that, I suppose, one argument, and it is tied into this, is a more stable price. They've moved away from the fluctuations. So, if a count price has gone up £10 a box, then that could be £1 or 50p difference on the piece of fish. And I think many, let's say, British fishermen would say that, oh, you're going for frozen because it's cheaper, and I'm not sure that's the truth. I think that it's a deeper issue, and I think they've probably gone over to it because it's a consistent pricing model. Why is it, do you think? What? So before we move on, what is it that those people, that you're talking about, essentially, what is it they need to be thinking about?
Is this in the retail
or no, wholesale now, like wholesale?
Wholesale. I think the people in the wholesale, again, it's continuity of supply. So when winter months come, when prices shoot up, when demand is low, then that causes market fluctuation. And as you say, if a box shoots up 10, £20 a box, that's going to have a huge effect on that supplier who cannot just charge to his customer on the given day. So I think I can understand why the consumers wholesalers would be encouraging the frozen at sea or something that's got a bit more continuity to it. That said, I do understand 65 million people in the United Kingdom, the quotas that we have to catch could not feed the 65 million mouths that we need to do if they all wanted fresh seafood. So we've got to accept that there is two markets here, and the markets are, there are those who understand the premium product, the fresh product, and that will give them a point of difference over the frozen at sea or the land frozen, for that matter, which is coming either pre-battered or in a frozen block, which that customer knows how he can make his margin on that without the fluctuation. So, and again, probably back to what I said earlier, different demographics, different communities of people will accept a different level of seafood. So I suppose that it's different markets, different people, and different marketing. So I think that would be it. But there is for wet Scottish seafood, which is now seen as a premium product. The Scotland itself is the brand. Anything that you prefix with Scotland now is usually associated with a level of, dare I say, not gold plated, but it is just because of the good branding. I think we've been very lucky in having Scotch whisky. We've been very lucky in having Scotch smoked salmon, and that too have been able for us to reach global markets that maybe weren't achievable before. And now on the back of that, we are able to piggyback our Scottish branded seafood and many other things, meats and food and drink, that we are able to get that premium from the market. Now, I would say, and you are going to laugh here, that when I taste other seafood, I'm not saying that their seafood is bad, not for a minute. It's very good, but I do seem to think that the Scottish seafood has just got a different flavour to it. But again, that is maybe my own bias, but it's just an opinion that I have, and I can now, or at least I think I understand why we could say, well, we can get a wee bit more for that on our premium market.
I think also, I suppose, if you pair it with the fact that you said earlier that the British regulations enforce higher welfare standards, so if you pair that with good quality food, good quality sea, all of this, I suppose it is going to make for a better product, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And again, some of the things that we have done in the North Sea, well, not in the North Sea, but in the northern North, in the whole sea area, was a scheme called fishing for litter. Now, when it first came out, I thought, what's this we're getting into now? But then I realised that the seabed was where I earned my income. And if we kept the seabed clean and tidy and removed the plastics, then that would bode well for future fisheries and So it's these little things that you do that you think, oh, that one might not any difference, but in actual fact, they do make a huge difference. And it's something that I was quite proud to be involved in latterly, where we have taken hundreds and hundreds of tons of, in some cases, lost netting, fishing gear, and such like, but also just rubbish that has been dumped at sea, not necessarily dumped at sea, but dumped into the sea from rivers, from beaches, whatever. And the one thing that we started to learn was that we even took our own rubbish at sea back to landfill, because there was no point in us trawling up rubbish to only dump our own rubbish over the side. But it was changing that mindset. And I even think back to my youth as a young boy, when all of our town in Peterhead at that time was maybe about 15,000 inhabitants. All of the town rubbish was dumped at sea. There was just a cliff edge. The rubbish cart. This is through this. You maybe find this hard to believe. My lifetime. The rubbish cart rocked up to the cliff edge. The tipper lift, and all the rubbish that it picked up that day was dumped into the sea. The tide came in. The tide came out, and it was clean again. And the cart would turn up every day and just do the same. No, maybe at that time there was a lot of stuff that just did break down, and it would just naturally broke down. But that was in the 60s. As we came into the late 60s, plastics and tins and all these things started to come and go. That is the type of things that we had to stop. So, replicating that now latterly as a fisherman, where we were taking all our own rubbish, but the rubbish we're also catching back to landfill, we were improving the health of the actual seabed. And I actually saw it like your own garden. If you look after your garden will look after you. So there's lots of things that we can do environmentally that can improve the situation.
No, that's a massive thing. Imagine just seeing a lorry just pull up, tip in the sea, and just go. That would be fly tipping today, wouldn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And it's still looking at it's one of those light bulb moments. You think, my goodness, why did we do that? But I suppose there was a lot of things that it just broke down naturally.
Yeah. You'd imagine a lot of the packaging back then might have been paper. Yeah. So that was, you think for years ago, you go to the butchers, your meat came in paper, and now it's plastic and cling film and foil and yeah.
And in my own e-commerce site, the one thing that we are now beginning to get from our own customers is, can you reduce your packaging? Can you stop the polystyrene? And therefore we're having to use innovation to try and improve how we can transport seafood right across the UK, next day delivery, still keep it chilled, or in some cases frozen, but using more environmentally products. Now, we found that the products are more expensive, but if that's what the customers want, because what I suddenly again have realised is we're creating a problem for the customer.
Yeah.
If you send them a polystyrene box, I'm quite happy thinking, well, at least the product's going to get there in premium condition. But then they've got this lovely seafood, but I've now left a problem in their kitchen table, which is this polystyrene box. How do they get rid of it? Because they've got a limited amount of space in their bin. So it's all these modern innovation will continue to drive forward good management practices that hopefully will make a huge difference to the environment.
It's a shame because polystyrene is almost, aside from the fact that it's made from crude oil, it's actually like almost the perfect packaging for your sort of product because it's very thick, it's got great insulation properties, and it, if you drop it on the floor, it's quite strong too. So it's almost like the perfect thing, aside from the fact that it's made from crude oil. And it does make you think if councils could recycle them properly, then it'd be a great medium, wouldn't it, really?
I think there's still a lot of work needs to be done there. But as you so rightly said, polystyrene is we struggle even to this day to find something that can truly replace it like for like, as in its ability to retain something at temperature controlled over a period of time. But I'm a great believer that innovation will come up with that answer. And one of the things that we have even changed is to move to dry ice. Now, it perfectly handled, well managed. It is a much better, because it just evaporates into the environment, as opposed to if you put in a frozen gel pack. Okay, that you could use the gel pack again and again, but it's still you're creating this problem for your customers.
Yeah, no, it's true. You've got to think ahead now, haven't you? Really,
Everything is about the future and how we. Because I think about it, governments are committed to signing up to agreements that by 2030 we will be much greener, much leaner. So we really have got to start that journey now and look towards the innovative things that are out there. They're always expensive at the start.
Yeah.
But even us as a small company, we're looking and saying, well, it is more expensive, but we are also addressing a serious problem with our customers. And what we've got to do is keep our customers happy.
Makes you wonder, talking of like energy and fuel and being green, do these boats, I take it most boats are using diesel, aren't they? They're diesel engines. How long do you think before that's phased out? Obviously, I guess they can't go electric because of the water. What other options are there? Hydrogen in that respect, maybe?
I think there will be something in the future, because even in my, well, not my lifetime, I've got to watch what I'm saying here, but my grandfather operated a steam drifter. In other words, they carried coal, they had a steam engine, and that is how they went to sea to catch their fish. And at one point, they had to make a decision. It must have been a huge decision to change from steam to diesel power. And I always think that was a huge step forward for the industry, because I suppose the diesel power was probably more powerful, it was more reliable, and now, 80 years down the line, we are going to another phase, and it's just like the electric car. Right now there are electric cars on the road. I think in the next 5 years, I think you will find there are much more electric cars, and there'll be less cars that are emitting carbon into the atmosphere. So therefore, something will happen at sea. But as you say, it might have to be some sort of other, like hydrogen or something of that nature, because you cannot just get you can't just plug in when you're in the middle of the sea. Your battery's low, so there's going to have to be something else.
Yeah, somehow I think water is bad for batteries, and salt water is even worse for batteries. So somehow I just don't see it.
But I have to say that even in today's modern world, the engines that we have now are much more carbon friendly. They have got to meet a certain criteria. So these engines are all tried and tested, and their emissions are much less. But if we look at the big pelagic ships, they're much more carbon friendly than we give credit for, because they can catch much bigger amounts of fish for less carbon footprint to produce protein.
Okay.
So, although some people look at them and say, "Oh, they're big ships and they're huge trawlers," but their ability to catch and harvest seafood per gallon of fuel used to do so is much less than many other industries.
One thing that's always I've always thought about, and I know this isn't strictly your expertise, but you've got a lot of experience in the industry and different roles over the years. But why is it that the British fleets, whether it's north or south, let's say, or whoever's catching cod and haddock, let's say, why is it they never invested in the trawlers that do frozen at sea? Why is that so? I don't know if you know the answer, or whether you've heard people talk about it, but I've always wondered, why did the UK never invest in that type of fishing?
Well, it did. Still yes, but it would have been our distant water fleet, which would have been out to Fleetwood, Hull, Grimsby, even Aberdeen. So we did have a distant water fleet. The innovation probably at that time, back in the 60s and 70s, wasn't there to do the frozen at sea harvesting. We do have one big ship, I think, in the UK called the Kirkella, and I think she's a massive ship.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
she can go off and do the frozen at sea. So we have one vessel, but we had a market and an infrastructure that was for the inshore waters and the near waters, that we were able to go and catch fish in abundance 3-4 days, come back and have it land processed and into a fresh market, which at that time could absorb that type of fish. But again, as I say, cultures have changed, palates have changed, and range has changed. I mean, look, if you think back, I think back to my young day, there was a fish and chip shop in every corner of the street. But if you go into a lot of communities now, there's a fish and chip shop, plus there is a takeaway and many different cultures of takeaways. So the range of seafood, the range of food out there for people to eat is much bigger than it was 20, 30 years ago. So that's why demand has come down. And I think that's why we have had to find markets elsewhere that will absorb that volume of fish that we can harvest and catch.
Yeah. No, it's interesting to think of it like that. And I think one of the things I wanted to ask when you mentioned it earlier, I wrote it down, is that you said the haddock and the cod has gone into deeper waters. Does that make the fish better because they're in colder waters, because they go deeper? And because I remember someone said a while ago that the deeper the cod or haddock, the better the flavour. And I did wonder if that was just salesman speak or whether it was actually true from a fisherman point of view.
It's not something that I could say I would have an opinion on, because I've never really been asked that question before. But I'll tell you what I have noticed, and I've seen this latterly when I was fishing. When we used to get the summer fishery back in the 70s and the 80s, sometimes the fish was so soft, it was so rich, just lying there gorging on sand eels, that you could very near push your thumb through the fish. It was just soft, and it was very hard for the processor to even get a fillet off.
Wow.
And yet latterly, the last 10 years, we did not see that same rich feeding in the fish, which means the food chain obviously had changed. And therefore, the fish, and even in the summer fisheries, after a few hours, the rigor mortis would set in, and you could just pick up a long fish and it would just be poker straight. And that tells me you get a great fillet, a great yield off that fish. So again, something in the environment changed, and it has changed the whole. Well, it's a feed chain. Whether it's plankton brings different things into the sea, and then it brings the sand eels, and the sand eels become the fish chasers. I always liken it to the story. I say to many people, if I go home at 5 o'clock on Monday night and there's no tea on the table, I'm a wee bit disappointed, but it's home and I keep turning up. So I go home on Tuesday night and there's still no tea on the table. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not liking this. I'm kind of getting hungry. And I go home on Wednesday night and there's still no tea. I'm off down to my mother because I know there is tea down there. And I think fish are not any different. There's got to be a food chain. And if the food chain moves, then the fish will follow that food chain.
Yeah.
So it's what's happening in the environment to create that food chain. And I think that's part of the reason why we don't see this rich, oily fish feed that we used to see 20, 30 years ago. That to me is one of the biggest environmental changes that I have seen. And that came from sand eels. And there's been no UK fishing vessel been fishing sand eels for over 20 years, and they've never returned. So you would think that if you didn't fish them, they would come back. But again, is it sea temperature? Does 1 degree of sea temperature make all the difference? the science and understanding it is really, really difficult.
I don't know a lot about eels, but I know that I was reading an article the other day, and it said that most eels for the pie and mash shops in the UK, and I guess there isn't many of those anymore, they come from Holland.
Yes, and again, that's probably another culture that is slowly dying, where the older generations would have eaten it, and the younger generations would rather have curry and chips.
I do think, though, I think the thing is with eels, for me, I think I've got this really inbuilt fear of snakes. I think, growing up in Cyprus a little bit when you go over there on holiday, or I spent a year when I was younger, there's just this weird fear of snakes, and eels remind me of snakes. So for me, I just look at them and I think, straight away, even now, just the thought of it. So, so I don't know. I wonder if, and again, and I wonder if, just like chicken in a way, people's palates has gone towards white fillets, no skin, no bone, and eels are quite bony, and I guess people, it's quite fiddly to eat, aren't they?
I always think that the people, especially children, get a bad experience with a fish bone. If it's very hard to get that person back on to eating fish in the future. But again, it's all about education. I'm a great believer that we should have a kind of in schools program, national in schools program, that we should understand our food chain, not only on seafood but all seafood. And we've got a great culture, great land. We are producers of some of the finest foods in the world, whether that is a crop, whether it is animals, kind of sheep, lamb, pork, chicken, and even our seafood. And I think the basics of life is understand where your food comes from, how it gets there, and the nutritional and health benefits that sit behind all of that, because it's all well and good having all these lovely things in supermarkets, and young mothers piling them in, and them just all full of additives and preservatives, as opposed to taking something that is just natural and creating a meal that can be so nutritious.
I think one of the biggest things is that people are afraid of cooking fish at home. I think, well, there's two things. I think when you cook fish at home, you can get that lingering smell a little bit, especially if you cook it on the top. But, if you bake fish, which isn't a problem, that's nice. But I think people fear then that it's that small window of opportunity. If it goes over by 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it was that you were eating, could be a bit dry. However, I do have a solution for that, and that is lots of butter. I think butter solves that problem. You put lots of butter on salmon, lots of butter on anything in the oven, and it's great. For me, it solves the issue. But I do think those are probably the two biggest issues with people. And again, if you've got a piece of whatever cod, let's say, next to in the supermarket, I think people look at that and think, oh, that's a bit expensive in comparison to, let's say, the steak that they think they can get right, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, and I do sympathise with people, because fish is not cheap, and they look at it and they've got that fear of not paying a lot of money for something that they'll ruin. And I think seafood is, to me, it is fast food.
Yeah.
And you can cook a piece of fish much quicker than you will cook a burger. Yeah. But it's that having the confidence to take it out before it's, as you say, overcooked. Because once you dehydrate it, it then becomes kind of dry on the palate, and
tough.
It's unpalatable, and it's a bit tough. And then you don't have an eating experience. Whereas if you just slightly even undercook it, you can easily slip it back into the grill or the hot plate or whatever for another few minutes if you think it just needs a wee bit more. But if you overcook it, you can't undo the bad you've done then. So dehydration in seafood is very easy to get wrong, but trial and error and be confident.
Yeah. And I think TV chefs cook a lot with fish, so that's always good. That gives them a bit of confidence there, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of these TV shows that we get across the UK really do promote a wide range of seafood, and we're delighted when we get the publicity that comes from that. But I think there's so much more we can do, especially on barbecues, summertime. And fish has not always got to be eaten hot as well.
It's
I mean,
true. Yeah.
I can the other day I cooked a nice piece of smoked haddock, and I just let it sit in the fridge the next day, and then I crumbled it over a nice salad, and it was just kind of, and
Yeah.
that was kind of cold product. So don't always think that we must eat it hot on that day.
At least twice a week, we've baked off some salmon. Mostly, I fall into the trap of doing what everyone else does, and it's in the fridge, it's ready to go. You can have it, and I'm obsessed with anchovies of any kind, so I'll make a salad with seafood, and I'll have anchovies with it. And
Yeah.
Anchovies for me, it's just, and I know they're not local, but there's just something about anchovies, that salty anchovy. It's amazing.
And again, it's an acquired taste.
Mm,
For the younger generation, they're probably a bit not sure because of the saltiness, but it is all these things are delicacies.
mm,
And as you rightly say, they're maybe not a local product to the United Kingdom, but again, I always look and say, well, a fisherman somewhere caught it,
mm,
and at that point, I always say, well, I know the hard work it goes into producing seafood, and I'm always one for experimenting and supporting, even if it's another community in another country, because I'm just so passionate about the seafood that the sea provides
mm.
for our health and our kind of our own well-being globally.
Talk one big risk against all sort of meat-based proteins at the moment is probably vegan-based proteins, and I think it's almost like nobody cares about where it's come from. They don't care whether it's grown in God knows where with terrible conditions, and I see this a lot at the moment where in the supermarket you see this grey looking pasty burger that says vegan on it, and you look at the ingredients, there's 60 odd different ingredients, most of them are vegetable oils and so on and so on. So that's always made me wonder how that can compete against fresh food and fresh fish. And I know an animal obviously died to give up an animal died to feed us, but it's funny because people expect so much off animal rearing or wild caught food, but they ask nothing about this vegan food that is, a hodgepodge of all these different ingredients.
I always find it a difficult question because, listen, at some point someone has created that because they have a passion and a desire to promote that.
Yeah.
But can I just keep coming back to the can one of the last things that man has not been able to take aquaculture out of it, wild caught. Man has not been able to interfere with that. It is one of nature's last food chains that is wild, and therefore it can. We've got to embrace that it is a great source of protein. It takes skill and passion to go and harvest it, and risk. And the risk is men go to sea to catch this fish. And I just think it's a great story, regardless of whether you're in China, whether you're in Australia, North America, Europe, Scotland. Can people go to sea and they use their skill and their passion to provide food for our plates? And I just think it's a great story.
Yeah. And I know, and I guess, like, when you're rearing animals, I guess, if you've got some crazy person working in a farm, they can be quite aggressive with an animal. But with wild caught fish, I guess that's, you're not going to see someone jumping in the sea to hit the fish, are you? I know it's a bit of an exaggeration. It's a bit of a push, but I guess animal rights issues in some ways are slightly different when you're out at sea, aren't they?
Yes, they are. I mean, it's a cold-blooded product, and it does come on board alive, but yeah, I mean, and listen, we do have issues with that, but it's not something that I'm comfortable or even understand where people are coming with that. We are fishers of the sea. We provide a protein. We go to sea. We catch the fish. We live with the constraints of the regulations and the legislation laid before us. We go and catch the fish. We provide it for people to process, and it goes out into the greater communities, and we feed people. That's what we do.
Yeah.
That is our main objective in life. We catch fish, we feed people, we keep people alive.
Yeah, no, definitely. And with everything that's been going on lately, it's sort of like we've had the government trying to get a trade deal through Brexit, and then we've had COVID. They couldn't have come at two worse times, could they, to cross paths, could they?
I go as far to say, when we hear the expression of the perfect storm, well, I think in this case, Stelios, this is the perfect cyclone. It was two storms came together at one time, and it has just been absolutely crazy. Could you imagine if you was to even if suggested that 3 years ago, you're going to get this pandemic is going to sweep the world,
Yeah.
but at the same time as Brexit is going on, you're just bad. We don't do pandemics. That's something that happens thousands of miles away. They get them, but we don't. Well, how long could we have been? And worse than that, who would have predicted when it did come, it was going to last a year? And we're still not out. It may be lasting a year and a half, it may be 2 years. Who knows? With all these new variants coming in, this is something that I personally, and I'm no scientist or no doctor, I think we have got to learn to live with. It is a disease, and it is now rife in our society, and we're never going to get rid of it unless we can get these vaccines that can control it and reduce or improve our health, our immune system to fight it if we do get it. So it's a very, very difficult and fickle situation.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose, would you say on the whole, what's the general feeling, would you say, with the Brexit deal, mostly just regarding to fish? What would you say the general feeling is at the moment?
The general feeling from the fishing communities and even the processing community, just the whole seafood supply chain, is of disappointment. There's no point in trying to dress it up in any other way. It is huge disappointment for everyone, even the Brexiteers and the non-Brexiteers. And you may be saying, well, why is that? Well, when governments sign up to something that benefits no one, there are no winners. And I think in this particular case, there are no winners. Everyone is a loser.
And is it a case of they've just kicked the can down the road for 5 years in order to figure out what's next? Or is it, is this it now? Are we done?
Look, I wasn't in the room and I wasn't the Prime Minister and I didn't get the opportunity to make the decision, but I think the Prime Minister was possibly under a bit of pressure to try and deliver something before the end of the year. I also think that any Prime Minister, regardless of who he is, has got a huge burden of responsibility on his shoulders, and he cannot look at one industry in isolation. So although governments and ministers and even prime ministers can promise you there are red lines, when it comes to the wire, they've got to look at the bigger picture. Now, I'm making myself absolutely clear here. I think the deal that the Prime Minister signed up to was terrible. But at the end of the day, he made the decision for his reasons. And it is possibly for the greater good of the country. But that was a disadvantage. So we are where we're at the moment. I think what we've got to say now is, right, there is a 5.5 year review. What do we do and how do we prepare for that time when it comes? Because although 5.5 years sounds a long time, that won't be long in coming around. And what we must do is make sure that we have an industry that is fit for purpose, ready to make the changes that it needs, and keep the pressure on the government to deliver on their pledge. And but the flip side to that is, who's to say who the Prime Minister will be in 5.5 years' time? Who's to say which colour that government will be? And who's to say who would want to revisit this anyway, considering it was such a divisive issue in the first place?
Yeah. It's pretty amazing that, in terms of the the UK economy, fishing is tiny, yet the voice that came wasn't tiny at all. It was a loud voice of opposition, wasn't it?
I just let you see the importance that fishing has to. You're right. In GDP terms, fishing is nothing.
Yeah.
That's why we were kind of the sacrificial lamb. But it lets you see how important it was to all the other communities, where these were the red lines that they were not prepared to give up, because and I think I've said it several times. Food, it's a great source of food, and it is a great protein. So everyone knows that they don't want to give it up. And I think what maybe the Prime Minister was thinking, well, if I agree to this is the happy medium. But if you have no knowledge or understanding of that industry in detail, and you make a snap decision, chances is you've made the wrong decision. And I think that's where we're at. But as I keep saying, look, we can cry over spilt milk. We are where we're at. What we've got to do is, yes, vent our frustration, but at the end of the day, we've still got to get down, sit around the table and say, right, how and what do we need to do to get out of this? Because we've got a period of time, and we need to make sure that our industry is fit for purpose for the future, because it will keep changing, it will keep evolving into other things, and we've got to make sure that we've got an industry, and I'm primarily speaking about processing here, that can compete in global markets. And again, I've touched on that. And you can only do that if you have a profitable industry.
Yeah.
To get a profitable industry, we must invest in innovation, in robotics, and modern, efficient premises, right? And I can expand on this a wee bit, because I understand this more now than ever. I went to an automated egg factory just a few miles from where I live in Peterhead, and I seen all these lovely robots, and I thought, that people have lost their jobs. And in the chat with the manager after, I said, well, that's fine. You've got all these lovely robots that can pick up eggs and pack them and all the rest of it. I says, but have people have lost their jobs? He says, on the contrary, the people that are now employed in here are now upskilled. They operate the robots. But what we don't have is the robot coming in on Monday morning and saying, oh, I've got a sore back, or oh, I've got repetitive strain. The robot is there every Monday. And he says, we now have increased productivity, increased profitability, and increased local employment. So when my initial thought was this robots actually do away with people's jobs, this has proved the absolute opposite. And this is again what I'm saying. We need machinery that can drive this industry forward to make it really efficient and get the yields that we need, get the production that we need, and get the upskill the people that are there to do the job, so they've got a better lifestyle, doing a better job, but they're still in the fish processing.
No, definitely. And hopefully the government can support those efforts with funding and tax breaks and so on, because it'd be great if they, let's think really positively here. If in 5 years' time they do get a better deal, well, hopefully by that point you guys are ready to ramp up.
Absolutely, and that's why I'm trying to be positive. I'm over the anger. I'm over the frustration. I cannot undo history. What I can do is continue to lobby government, both governments, because we are lucky. We've got two governments, but we've got to stop this tittle tattle. We've got to see, right, what is the bigger picture? How can we embrace what we've got, learn from what we've done, but provide the path and the infrastructure investment that we need to make sure that we've got an industry that will continue to be world leading, because that's where we are. I think when I look at our industry, we've got some of the finest skilled skippers and crews in the world. I think if I look at the processing sector, that we have got some very good factories, but I think we could have some even better factories. And I would like to see that inward investment coming to the onshore side of things, so that our own fleet want to catch the fish that they've got in our country, to be processed in our country, to provide that economic benefit that the communities will thrive off, rather than we've still got a fleet, but that fleet wants to land in other European ports. We lose that economic benefit, and that's the thing that it's not that I want them to land there. I just want, again, if that fish is caught in Scotland or in Scottish waters, then by a Scottish boat, I would like to see a high percentage of that being landed in Scottish ports, where Scottish people, and I'm being very specific here, but I can generalise and say, well, UK boats, UK people. But I'm a Scotsman.
Yeah, so that's fine.
And I've got to think about that and say, right, we need to make sure that benefits and these skills remain in our communities, and therefore we become the global leaders of seafood. So it's that's my passion, it's my vision, it'll never change. Yeah. And as long as I've got blood pumping through my veins, that's what I will hand on heart, passionately go out and sell. And all I need to do is get the politicians and other like-minded people behind us, and we can make this industry great.
Yeah, definitely. Well, one thing I wanted to sort of, wrap up on really is, what do you think has changed from, well, let's say if your granddad could see what you're doing today, what do you think he would see as the most striking difference? And maybe the same for someone like your dad as well, which is only one generation behind you. What do you think they would see as the most striking difference?
Oh, I would think innovation. This just the sheer technology that takes up computers, without a question of doubt. When I started fishing, and I look back at my career, and I started fishing, I sat for 2 winters copying the charts of the skipper that I was with. So we had big cardboard charts, and you would take a few home every weekend, and you had to draw on the lattices, and then you had to get all the wrecks and the depths of water. So there was great fishing areas, and you would have to replicate what he'd built up over the years on paper, right? No, this is in 1986, right? 85, 84, 85, 86. The first thing that I got when I became a skipper in late 1986 is there was this thing called digital chart displays. So we were able to take this that was on paper and now put it onto electronic data. And the world changed overnight. Within 5 years, a skipper could come along and copy your charts. If you could get access into your charts, he could have these copied and in his back pocket literally in seconds, which took me 3 years to do. So, and that was just in a short period of time. So computers is definitely are a great aid to navigation, and are a great aid to helping a skipper take a vessel to a fishing area and locate fish. But you know something, all of that still takes the skill of the skipper to catch the product. And it's knowing when to go there, what depth of water, what way he should be. Should he be there in the dark, or should he be there at night? Should he be there at the top of the tide or the bottom of the tide? That is the thing that the computer hasn't done yet, is there's still an element of skill in catching and harvesting fish.
I must admit, as you know, we've got Alan Addison coming on the podcast in a couple of weeks, and he rang me up off his boat, and he goes, "Oh, you're struggling to understand me, Stelios?" I was like, "No, I was just shocked that he called me from out at sea." And I was thinking, I just assumed for some reason when he said to me, I'm going out to sea, so we'll do the podcast in a couple of weeks. And I just thought he meant I'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. And he actually rang me that day from out to sea. And I thought to myself, like, I just assumed that it was going to be he was far away and couldn't talk, and yet he was just calling me like a normal thing. And I bet that's different.
Yeah.
That must be different as well.
Connectivity with, I mean, you're right, because when we left to go to the fishing grounds, once you were a few miles off land, that was it. You'd lost contact with, and that's even when we had mobile phones, and that was it. That was it until you come back on land. I would speak home to my wife every night, so my wife couldn't speak to me. This was a fantastic deal. I could speak to her. She could never speak to me. She had a receiving wireless at home. I had a specific channel that I would just call home. I had a whistle. She would know it was me, and all that I was really doing was reporting in. She knew that we were well and things was okay, and she would know by my voice, by my tones, whether fishing was good or bad. But as I say, the great part of that deal is she could never call me. But as I say, innovation, satellite connectivity, all of a sudden, we then were able to communicate with our families. And that was a huge step forward for crews because they were able to communicate. Now, I think it was a huge step forward for crews. I think one of the downsides of that was it killed conversation on the boat. Because latterly, when you went down into the galley to have a meal, all that you saw was the crowns of people's faces, because all they were doing was communicating WhatsApps or Messenger or whatever with their families. And again, you can't knock people for that. They're speaking to their loved ones. But before, when you were getting into the galley, there had been a bit of banter and a bit of joviality and just general fun and games. These mobile phones are fantastic things, but they're conversation killers. Yeah. So, but I still can. Would you hand my one back in? Absolutely not.
I'm quite intrigued on this whole one-way receivership thing. I think I'm going to ring up Apple and see if they can get me an iPhone that just works one way. The only problem is I'm sure the wife would take it off me first. So, so last thing before we end up here, what if there's one thing that you maybe think that I haven't touched on? What is the one thing that you think our listeners really need to know? Like maybe I haven't touched on it, or I didn't really allow you to sort of open it up a little bit. Is there anything that I may have missed?
I think we're an industry, and this is just me speaking aloud, because I've know two sides to this industry. So my understanding and knowledge of the catching side is that we are highly skilled. We understand science. We really want to have a long-term future, but we want the stability in the fishing industry. Taking that on shore, I can see youth that can come into an industry now and be highly skilled and trained in whether that's a knife skill and you're able to be a fantastic filleter and get a great yield, or whether you're coming in as again on an innovation side where you keep machinery going, or you're a marketeer. And I just think the whole supply chain, and it probably replicates this in many other chains, but we're a highly regulated industry. We've got great volumes in there. And whether you want to be at sea or whether you want a career in a processing sector, I just think that it's a great career move, because the one thing that I do know, pandemics, no pandemics, people need to eat. And when we've got a population in the globe continuing to grow year on year, decade on decade, and people knowing the values and the nutrition that comes from seafood, I just think it's a great kind of. Oil and gas will come and go. It's got a timeline. Yeah. Food production will always continue. So to me, I would just like to see more people come in, see it as a great career move, and invest in their own abilities. So fantastic! It's been a great opportunity to just. Well, I think we've covered a lot of things. I hope there have been some good things, some interesting things.
I think so. Like anything, when a little bit of information goes out, we end up getting loads of questions. So it might be that we end up bringing you back on later on in the year or with somebody else. And, that way we can have a bit of a cross conversation, which was actually meant to be the plan for today anyway. But like we said earlier, there were some technological issues.
No, and these things happen. Yes, I'd be happy to come back at any time and discuss kind of in a bit more detail. And you're right. It kind of it's a one-on-one, it is probably a bit more personal and in depth. Whereas when there's others there, that can lead the conversation into to various different little pockets that you can expand on. But no, it's been a pleasure to share some of my thoughts. And again, they're only my opinions. All of us have got our own opinions, but I think what I've learned in life is you've got to have an open mind about different things and how people think. And we're not all the same. If we were all the same, the world would be dull and boring.
Exactly.
You need variety.
Yeah, variety is the spice of life, as they say, isn't it? Yeah. So Jimmy, for those that might want to get online and order some of your langoustines, what's the website? Where do they need to go?
The website is www.amityfish.co.uk.
Fantastic.
There's a lot of information on there about us. We are a small team, but a young, dedicated team. And that's the one thing that I have been doing, is investing on the younger generation. And it's been a fantastic journey. They will be the people that will take over from me, but I'm just hoping I can share all this experience that I've gained both at sea and on shore. And as I say, I'm now trying to take the quayside to the people right across the United Kingdom. And we need your support, and I'm sure they'll come on, and there's a great variety of fish there. And even if they want to send us an email, if they're not sure how to do things, that's what we're here to do. We're all on a journey, and it's fantastic for all.
Amazing. And thank you for your time from me, Jimmy, and obviously from all the listeners, because you are giving up your time, and I know it's, what time is it? It's nearly 6 o'clock, and you're in your office talking to me, so I'm really grateful for your time.
Lovely. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and hey folks, stay safe, keep healthy, and keep listening.
I think that's a better send off than one of mine, I think, Jimmy. All right, mate. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.